Hey, Dave, good to see you. Thanks for jumping on a conversation today. We want to talk about the evolution of the AMS market. You've seen a lot over the years, and it makes sense. I mean, there's a time right now where we have the advent of AI. We have this market that's been changing, and we'll talk about all the different phases it's gone through. But just wanted to have a conversation and pick your brain about what your thoughts are. So, do you want to take a second and just sort of introduce yourself and then sort of jump into maybe when you started this, what the AMS market looked like and kind of where it's gone to now, and we can sort of fill in the gaps from there.
Great. Well, thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me on this. It's always exciting to kind of talk about the evolution of the industry because I think associations, they don't get to see it day in and day out like us consultants do. And that's a problem because they're kind of shopping handicapped. They're blind. And so I have this conversation a lot, but I love this opportunity to get it out there in the larger
Yeah.
market. So I've been around in this industry, and unlike many of the other consultants, I didn't come out of the association space. I came out of technology. I ran before it was even termed on MSP or Microsoft service or solution provider. We did become Microsoft partners once Microsoft started that program, but we actually started in the late 80s, and I built an MSP that was servicing hundreds of association clients in the DC metro area. And this was back in the day when things in the computer world were just getting going. And it was really exciting. And we went in and put in all the server racks and implemented the software in a large number of associations in the DC area. And I've had a front row seat to watching this market evolve. So I did that for about 14, 15 years, sold that company, started a .com, had a great time, raised $24 million. And it was in the ambulatory healthcare market. And we were providing back office and front office software for ambulatory care physicians
Hmm.
on tablet PCs back in 2000. And so
Yeah.
they were running around before the internet was around, before broadband was around, which is kind of the thing that really ended up hurting
Sure.
us in the long run. And then we did all right. We had 1,500 physicians US
Mm.
wide, and ended that when we sold what was left of the company. We got it up to 8.5 million, but when you've acquired 23, 24 million, 8.5 million doesn't get anybody excited.
Mhm.
So I got out of that, and then I decided, what am I going to do next? And I returned to the market that was near and dear to my heart, and that was the association market. And I feel for associations because essentially most of them, if not all, are small businesses. And technology was new, it was coming, it was very expensive, and they needed guidance. So I basically hung out a shingle, started Associations Rewired, and that's what brought us to this. And that's been for the last 20 years. So I've spent more than 30 years. We don't go into the details, but you can see it on my head. And you've been in this industry for almost as long. You're younger than me, but that's what happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I look forward to this opportunity, and
Yeah.
let's dive in.
Yeah. Sounds good. Yeah. Appreciate that background. So, just talk about maybe like what did it look like? So you start in the industry, you're helping folks find their tech and you're trying to guide them in the AMS world. I mean, what did the AMS world even look like at that point?
Oh my God. Well, it was the computer market in general was, in its infant stage.
Yeah.
And like I said, I had an MSP. We're putting in networks, and 70% of our clients were associations, and they were all starved for, something to put on those computers to help them move
Yeah.
forward with their mission. And there wasn't much out there. I had some of the early adopters, and I won't name specific names of the individuals that were also in Washington, D.C., but they basically started with desktop databases like DBase and FoxPro.
Yeah.
And, names like that are going
Good
to
old days.
be
Yeah.
before most people's
Oh yeah.
time.
Yeah. For
And they
sure.
but they built systems, and they were people experienced for having worked at associations. They built database systems to help associations drive their operations,
Yeah.
and increase their efficiency. And, for example, Rob Miller, which everybody probably knows, I will mention names, built a Vectra, or Blaze, it was called,
Yeah.
on FoxPro. And that eventually became a Vectra,
Yeah.
which then became Netform Enterprise, as it graduated and moved off the desktop up into the network, and then ultimately into the cloud. And
Yeah.
similarly, in about the same time frame, IMAS was built also on a desktop database called Omni System 7. I remember that. I remember the shrink wrap
Wow.
boxes on my shelf of all these products. And that eventually evolved to IMAS in a full cloud hosted environment.
Yeah.
So it was an exciting time. I used to go door to door to all our associations with these tech vendors to
Yeah.
show them this technology, and that's basically how the market evolved. So
And
it
so
was
from there, it went to the cloud, basically. I mean, was that the next step?
well, yeah. It eventually moved. It went from the desktop to the server room. So
Right.
it serves. So there was a shared database that everybody on the network could use, as opposed to one machine that everybody could use.
Right.
And but everything was on premise. So it was kind of like they had to build up IT shops to support this functionality, and they had to. It was everything they could do to keep the lights on. And I mean that
Mhm.
in many cases, literally, because
Yeah.
oftentimes the server is plugged into the same outlet that was shared by a coffee maker. And somebody would come along and unplug something thinking it was, another device in the kitchen or in the storage closet, and literally shut off the server, and people would come running screaming. So, so it was an interesting time.
Yeah, that's good. And so we move from the desktop to the server room to the cloud, and the market is growing. There's more and more opportunities, right? I mean, take us back to maybe 15 years ago. What did it look like about at that point? The cloud's around and the market's starting to mature a little bit. Some of the heavy hitters are there, but there's newbies coming in. So what did that feel like? You know?
So that was an intriguing time, because everything was changing, kind of like not as fast as things are changing now, but it was very interesting, because if you picture the stuff that moved from the desktop to the server room, the move to the cloud was kind of like a lot of those vendors were sort of taking a wait and see attitude. They weren't sure, but
Mm,
this whole cloud thing was a little amorphous, and they literally and figuratively, and they didn't really know if that was something they
yeah.
wanted to take on. And at the same time, you had other vendors out there, and these are largely mid-market and even early market adopters, like Your Membership, which became YM. I think it's still called Your Membership, and a bunch of others that came into the market, and they built to purpose an AMS designed for the cloud. And so you had the desktop folks that were migrating their
Mm,
technology up, which was
yes.
kind of a haphazard
Sure.
step and error and fix and restep capability. And then you had those people that came out with what we call multi-tenant solutions in the cloud that worked.
Yeah.
And they weren't as robust as a lot of these desktop solutions that have evolved, or on-premise solutions, I should say.
Hmm.
Um, but the simplicity of those systems was intriguing to many of the associations, because they it's not like they were sitting back and waiting for this whole computer fad to pass,
Yeah.
but
Right.
it was a very challenging time for them, because they weren't sold on the promise of technology and what it was going to do for them. And this was kind of a let's try this or try that time it was an interesting era.
Yeah.
But the early adopters and the mid-market adopters that came in and did that kind of paved plowed the road, if you will,
Hmm.
for everybody to realize that the internet was going to be the big enabler, that was what was going to allow them to scale and provide the services that were necessary. The problem with the mid-market folks is that they wanted to be product companies. They wanted a cookie cutter product that they could stamp out at a given client, do some minor tweaks to cover that last mile, and then move on to the next client and thereby truly be scalable, which they were. YM
Yeah.
was very successful. In fact, it could be argued that YM was the progenitor to what is today a multi-billion-dollar industry in the form of Momentum, or as many of you may know it as Community Brands. But YM was the pioneer. That was the thing that gave them the money to get together and build that company. But again, the trade-off there was the trade-off between how much customization they were willing to do, because that would usurp their resources and take them away from focusing on evolving the product. And many of them smartly focused on scalability of having a true product, whereas many of the others, especially new companies, became entranced by the amount of service revenue they were receiving, and that ended up being kind of a model they wanted to pursue, but it didn't allow them to scale well. So it was a unique time. The cloud folks had limited customization options, and the on-premise folks would customize to whatever you're willing to spend.
And did that dictate the budget in the areas, the market itself? Small to mid-sized stayed productized, and it was only the big organizations that could really afford the customizations back then? Is that kind of how it went? We don't want to
that actually kind of came later.
Okay.
Yeah, that kind of came a little bit later because there were a few forks in the road for those evolving to the cloud, and that was one of the biggies. And the focus was, do you want to be a product company or do you want to be a service?
Yeah.
I had overheard and actually been in the room with several vendors that would have had those arguments in the C-suite, in the boardroom, and the CEOs all wanted to be product companies because they wanted to scale and make a lot of money, and that made sense. So that meant we're not going to customize this thing to the nth degree because we don't want to spend time and effort on services. We want to be able to standardize it and get all the benefits that come with that in terms of ease of support, maintenance, and so on, and have everybody in lockstep on the same system, essentially.
Yeah.
The problem was that those shops that wanted to go that route, and they're basically all of what the early enterprise shops were, had that argument in the boardroom about services versus product, and it always ended in the same way. And that was the CFO would come in and show them the balance sheet and show them that half or more of the revenue was coming from services, and that usually killed the argument and left those firms kind of moving forward in a staggered fashion because they have so much of the resources tied up with doing implementations and customizations and ongoing customization.
And the support around
and then having to support all of those. It was basically everybody had a unique product.
Yeah.
They started with the last mile. And that literally became more the last 10 miles because customers, once they got onto this thing that, oh, we could modify this, that, and the other thing, ended up drinking the Kool-Aid, and they usually stopped when they ran out of money. And that's when the evolution stopped. But it could be argued that many of them resented having gone down that road, having looked back, because they ended up building a Frankenstein. That something that not only was it only their vendor that could help them solve problems, but it may only be a couple of people at the vendor who know their unique build out that was required to get to that last mile and that customization for that customer that could actually interact with it. And that also came back to bite them at upgrade time, because upgrades to the software, to the foundational software would come out. And in many cases, we've all heard the stories and witnessed it firsthand in many cases of that causing customers to have their customizations broken. They go upgrade and all of a sudden a bunch of stuff doesn't work. And then they'd have to go back and spend a fortune paying these vendors to fix the stuff that they also paid them to build in the first place. and it became kind of more than a little annoying, to say the least.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
That's interesting. And then more recently, there's been a switch to building on top of an existing platform. So talk about that evolution, the Salesforces and all that kind of stuff.
Yes, and that was right around 2010, thereabouts.
Right.
Salesforce came
Yeah.
out, I think, in the late 90s as a CRM platform, and it wasn't really adopted for more wider applications until about 2010. And later, being Microsoft, they always do things a little later. They want to see other people test the waters on the market first, and then they come and throw everything at it. Microsoft came out with Dynamic CRM, and the promise of the platform was intoxicating. People could suddenly solve all the issues they were having. If you picture all these, the scenario I just talked about where they customized to a fault, right?
Mhm.
And they got stuck with the system that they were the only customer for. And it evolved to the point, the platform gave them the promise of the best of both worlds, because what was happening with the aging of the enterprise applications is they would build features and functions to your heart's content, because new buyers, new customers were willing to pay for that. But nobody was going to pay them to modernize the
Mm.
foundation.
Right.
And so the foundation would lag considerably, and often on many of the platforms to this day, and I know there was some pushback on that, but they all tell you, oh yeah, no, we have major updates every quarter and whatever. But no, that's feature function. That may be cleaning up some stuff, but it is not modernizing the foundation. So the platform gave them the best of both worlds, because now the foundation was run and managed and evolved and modernized by big tech. And in fact,
Mhm.
their very livelihood was predicated on their ability to keep that foundation modern. And it left the AMS vendors just focused on that last mile, which is what they should be focused on. So that fixed that problem I just mentioned of not modernizing the foundation. And it was beautiful, but the promise was a little different than the reality. I'm not sure where to start with that. But there were a lot of issues that came in to haunt a lot of these vendors. For one thing, the foundations, the platforms that they were built upon, didn't have all the feature functionality that the AMS vendors needed to be able to build out their AMS. And as a result, those vendors turned to hard coding bits that were necessary. And when I say bits, I'm talking about fundamental capabilities such as accounting, form building, and then of course later things said CRM was baked into the platforms, but not necessarily married to the AMS functionality. And the website side of it, the portal, all of them had to have a member portal. That was something they had to build from whole cloth in hard code.
Mm.
And that was great. They built all this stuff, but then moved forward another 10 years or 5 years. And what happened was that the foundation builders, the big tech companies, Salesforce and Microsoft, would build not necessarily a full accounting capability, but pieces of it. Salesforce came out with things called like the price book and the subledger, and they were bits of accounting, but the big AMSs that were built on top of Salesforce couldn't connect to those processes, because what they built for those functions was built prior to them, to the platforms coming out with that functionality, and never the twain shall meet. There was no way to
Mm.
integrate those capabilities. So what happened is that every day that went by, they were becoming more and more incompatible with the very platforms they were built on. And that's okay if you're happy with what you got. But if you
Mhm.
want to move forward on the platform and you want to evolve and kind of land and expand, if you will, to to extend that, perhaps you want to build an inventory management system on your AMS. That's all well and good, but somebody, a Salesforce partner or a Microsoft partner who wants to come in and build that inventory system, is going to build it for the platform, which
Mhm.
isn't going to work with the AMS product because their underpinnings are different. So that was a problem. The other problem that came about with the platforms, especially in the Salesforce case, is things got somewhat pricey. The prices never went down with Salesforce. And in fact, and same thing's true with Microsoft CRM, which had different issues because they kind of staggered out of the gate and they didn't readily move to the cloud. They'd move pieces of CRM to the cloud. And that left the vendors that had built AMSs in a quagmire because some of the functionality they depended on wasn't in the cloud. And so if they wanted to move to the cloud, so they couldn't. They had to use a hybrid model for a while, and that came back to bite them big time. But so the promise was there, but between the proprietary tech that was stuck in the underlying platform and the problems associated with the cost ever increasing on the platform, it became, I'm not going to say it was priced out of the association market, but it was getting more and more expensive. And the original promise, and I was one of the original evangelists on this because I thought it made sense to be able to go to a whole ecosystem that had thousands of vendors that could help you expand and extend and augment the capability of your AMS without being handcuffed to the vendor. Because people were getting tired of that because the bills were getting higher and higher, and they were getting less and less in return for those payments. So the promise of the platform is still there.
Yeah.
There are some new platforms out there that are much more modern. Remember, I said Salesforce started in the late 90s and Microsoft didn't really get going until the late aughts. These newer platforms were evolved in this decade. And it shows because 20 years in the digital world is primordial ooze. It's a long
That's a long
time.
Well, so
Okay.
let's just there's a lot going on in the AMS market just in general. We know that in a lot of different ways, but let's just extend talking about the product specifically into today. So, where are we at right now? And when you're talking to your clients that are saying what's happening in the world right now and what do I need to do to get the right AMS, or should I keep my AMS? Like, what's happening just right this minute? So somebody listening saying, I'm not sure what to do right now. And what's your answer to that?
So it's a mixed bag, as it always is, but the fact of the matter is the market is evolving and it's maturing. And that's a good thing for customers because when markets mature, you generally get more for less. And with technology, that's always true. So the legacy industry, the enterprise vendors have gotten more and more expensive. And there's a couple of pieces to that too that I want to throw in there. For one thing, private equity discovered our little association market. And that was not a good thing. Whatever you may feel about private equity, they generally do not improve the quality of the products and service because they don't buy to keep, they buy to sell. And they want to squeeze money out of something that where the money isn't there. So in the old days, the enterprise vendors they were willing to absorb costs in implementation because they knew they would have the long ongoing subscription revenue from the client. So they could afford to do that. Private equity came in and said, no, we're not doing that anymore. And they would come in and they would get rid of a lot of the higher costs that the AMS vendor had and do everything to maximize revenue and profit. That was their sole focus. They didn't really care that much. And I know I'll get a lot of pushback on this, but they didn't care about what the product was or what it did. They didn't care that much about the market per se. They wanted to be able to take this, package it up, maybe acquire a few other technology companies, and within a 2-year time frame, sell it at a profit and then walk away. And that's turned into a churn that has taken over the industry and really eroded the quality of the products and the services that people got in the enterprise market, because part of the costs that they jettisoned happened to contain a lot of the institutional knowledge of how the products were built. And that left the vendors in a difficult position to service and maintain those products because they lost a lot of that knowledge of how to do that. You will see that a lot of the enterprise vendors who started out in that between the rock and a hard place I talked about before, that is between are we a product company or are we a service company, they finally, being pushed by private equity, have offloaded the implementations to a partner channel. And the problem with that is that that little trade-off that I talked about a minute ago, where they were willing to absorb some of the costs of the implementation in order to keep and make the client happy, those days are more or less over, because now it's two separate entities and the vendor isn't responsible for the cost of the implementation, and the cost of the implementations are considerably higher than they were just 5 years ago because of this. And private equity's coming in because subscription revenue is like cat to these guys. They want something where you get a customer and you've got a customer, if not for life, for a long time, because you're getting monthly revenue when you just build that base, and it's a wonderful thing. They also bought, most of them, if not all of them, bought prior to acquiring the AMS companies. They acquired payment gateways, and that allowed them not only to get the front end revenue from the subscription, but they could get a cha-ching on the back end of every transaction that goes through the AMS, whether that's membership dues or event registrations or education classes, what have you. And they love that model. But long story short, what it means to the customer is they were paying a lot more for a lot less. Now, fast forward, there is an end of the market that we didn't really talk about. And I guess we were segueing into it, and that's the product of the market. And YM is really kind of the pioneer of that, where they had a true cookie cutter solution that was scalable. That market, it scaled up over the years to have much more robust functionality. But better than that, in the last 5 years alone, that's the size of that market has doubled. There are a ton of new vendors out there, and they're building on newer tech stacks that allow them to create systems that are far more robust in functionality and far more flexible in their implementation. And what that means to the customer is that now, by looking at the product end of the market, they can actually achieve that goal of getting more for less. So I could tell you that there are a number of enterprise implementations that we stewarded in the last, 5 to 10 years ago that would pale in comparison to what customers are getting today out of the product market. And they're paying 1/10 of what they would in that older build that last 10 miles from scratch, because these modern tech stacks allow them to do it. So the customer's in a much better place than they had at any time. If the last time they shopped for an AMS was 5 or more years ago, it's a totally different landscape now. And anybody shopping in the enterprise market should be looking at the product market.
So so that being a piece of advice, what is your full spectrum sort of, if you're looking for an AMS today, here's the steps you should take, here's the things you should be looking at, here's the considerations for the future. I mean, what are you telling your clients that come to you to help help find a new AMS?
A couple of things. First of all, the last time you did this was 5 or more years ago. Jettison that process. The process that you use to identify the system you're on today will not work in the new modern market, or you'll just wind up going down a lot of rabbit holes and spending a lot of money and wasting a lot of time. In the past, when we would go into a client, we would do a full-blown requirements gathering process it was kind of a blue sky opportunity for the staff to put together their ideal system based on their perception of their needs. And that was fine, and the consultants could translate that into tech speak so they could relate it to the enterprise vendors and kind of steward that. But what picture this. If I were to describe a football player making a touchdown, doing that little celebratory thing where they throw the ball down into the ground, raise their fist in the air. Think of two images of that. One is a photograph, full color photograph, and you're seeing the football player go through this little celebration dance. And the other is a stick figure drawing. Very basic. They both tell this exact same story. Anybody could look at either image and tell you exactly what that was. The difference is that the photograph is what's in the mind's eye of the association hiring the vendor, and the stick figure is the version that's in the vendor's mind's eye of what they're building. And never the twain shall meet. So the role of the consultants was kind of straddling that line and trying to get the vendor to provide a much more richer, detailed image of what their needs and requirements are, more in the mind's eye of the customer. And at the same time, we'd have to go to the customer and save them from themselves, because 80% of the cost got eaten away in that last mile of getting the perfection of that paint. Yeah, I like blue, but not that blue. And this would go on and just chew up dollars to the point where systems were easily exceeding 6 digits, and I have seen many implementations exceed 7 digits. And again, 80% of that is fleshing out stuff that is probably likely to change in the first 6 months to a year of having the system, because what they envisioned that they wanted versus the reality of having it wasn't all that important in the first place.
Yeah.
And they just didn't get it. And that's definitely what the role of consultant is. But again, those days have changed. So now people looking at systems should start with their strategy first, broad-based strategy, not the details down in the weeds of how it has to look and how it needs to behave, and forget about trying to mirror the process that you use today, because you developed that process not in a vacuum, but it evolved over time with the tools that were available at the time. And if you use that to spec a new, more modern system, you're kind of holding yourself back. So forget about that level of detail. There's so many stories about be careful what you wish for. And so my rule is stay at the high level, look at the product. You can find something that will be 10% of the cost and provide 80 to 90% of the functionality you need, and don't invest in that last 10%, because if you do, it's likely to change in the coming years. And now with AI and everything changing as rapidly as it is, stop clinging to things, because it's all going to change quickly. Go with the path of least resistance. Pick products that are large, cover, like I said, most of your needs, but have the ability to evolve and allow you to evolve without spending an arm and a leg and years trying to implement these.
That's
Does that
great.
make sense?
Well,
Trying to
so because where we ended up with the AMS market a little bit is a checkbox war. We need to be able to say we do this because everyone asked for it, and then the list just got longer and longer and longer, right? And it's unsustainable for everybody. So it's great to see that we're backing out a little bit. But you mentioned AI, so I don't know that any of us have a perfect crystal ball on what that's going to do, but what should people be thinking about? I mean, as they're selecting an AMS today, are there questions they should be asking of the vendor to say, what are you doing with AI, or what matters there?
Well, AI is important, and I expect in the next 2 to 3 years, this market's going to change dramatically as far as how much penetration AI has. It's just taking hold today. But to give you a wonderful example, there are a couple products out there that basically use AI to monitor all of the KPIs in the system without having a structure to go after it. And they can identify what makes a given member more likely to attrit or not renew than others. And so they're using AI to identify insights that you don't know
Mhm.
and then capitalize on those insights by presenting it to you and show you where you can head this off at the path so that you can prevent losing these members. So that's just one example. Some of the others are out there and they're just sort of toying with it and providing front end, basically help desk assistance to the staff for how to better use the system by letting AI answer the questions. But to me, the more intriguing part is the first example I gave you, where they can look at your members' activity and start identifying patterns in those behaviors and help you discover where do your members want to go and where do they not want to go, and
Yeah.
allow you to provide much greater engagement, much less attrition than previously thought possible. So keep it simple. Don't use the lens that you used 5 years or more ago, and be open to looking at solutions that 5 years ago you wouldn't have considered because they cost too little. I know that sounds ridiculous, but that's an argument I have day in and day out today.
That's a great insight. Yeah, and good to know because I think people just want to know what their move should be right now. They're not happy with their AMS or they don't want to just make do anymore. But is it a time to sit back and see what happens, or is it a time to move forward? And
I
yeah,
mean, I know this is going to sound self-serving, but in my opinion, everybody should be, who hasn't bought a system in 5 or more years, should be looking at it because they could reduce their costs and increase their productivity for a fraction of what they're paying today. And yes, there's always pain going through an AMS migration. But again, if you move to the product segment of the market, you're missing a lot of that pain because they're engineered around getting you up and running within 3 months as opposed to 1 to 2
right.
years. And that means that you can be up and running much faster and a lot less pain and a lot less money. And moving forward, your bills are going to be considerably lower.
And it's fair to say the EMS uh, vendors are understanding where AI is going to fit in. They want it to fit in as much as any of us do to enhance the product and the experience as well.
Y-
So there's going to be evolution with wherever direction you go, but it feels like AI has to be a part of the conversation.
Yeah,
And the AMS providers, it's key for them to be able to answer the questions, right? Now, that's probably a
yeah,
red flag if they can't.
right, right. And so AI is existential. So the AMS vendors that adopt it early and integrate it deeply into their platforms are going to succeed, and those that are laggards and left behind are going to pay for it in a big way. So I think it's very important to ask vendors today. Don't have high expectations because these things, AI came out in 2 years' time, but massive tech firms were behind that. The AMS vendors are essentially small businesses. They, just like the associations that they serve, they don't change that quickly and readily. So they're just kind of sticking their toes in the water now. And some of the newer products are built on leveraging AI for everything they do. And so you should look at that. You should talk to vendors about what does their revenue look like? What percentage of it is service and what percentage of it is product? Because that tells you a lot about, how complex and costly the implementation and the maintenance and the service and support is going to be. And like I said, be open to evolving with the maturing of the market because it's there to serve you. To take advantage of that means better, faster, cheap. Don't sit back and wait because in the meantime, you're falling behind and you're spending a fortune just to maintain the as is state, which obviously, if you're thinking about it, if you purchased 5 or more years ago, I guarantee you're thinking about, should we be looking at a new AMS? And I'm here to tell you, absolutely.
That's great. And that's a great way to sort of close out what we're talking about today. Any parting words? I mean, what is anything you want to say before we sort of sign off?
No, I'm just very excited about the opportunities ahead. I think the cadence of change that we've witnessed in the last 30 years that I've experienced is going to be so compressed, it's going to be unrecognizable moving forward. it's going to be a blur. And yes, we're going to all get whiplash from just trying to keep up. But the more of that you can do, the more you're going to stand, because your competition is going to be doing it. And if you're not doing it, just like the AMS vendors, if they're not doing it, they're going to get left behind. And you don't want to get left behind. And the fact that you can do it for pennies on the dollar, what it used to cost, means by all means. It's not, don't look at it as being the solution that's going to hold us for the next decade, because nobody knows. Nobody, we used to have 2-year, 1-year, 3-year, 5-year plans in our business model. Those are all out the window.
Sure.
Nobody can do that anymore. So find something that fits you for today and has the flexibility to evolve to tomorrow, and don't spend it on the leg dip.
That's great. All right, cool. Well, I mean, I think we covered a lot of ground. It was, I love the perspective and the insights that you provided there. So appreciate you spending some time today having a conversation about the AMS market and the evolution and where we are today.
Great. And I love talking, obviously, I love talking about this stuff, but Association Rewired is open if anybody wants to call and just have a conversation. I'm happy to discuss it with them. I can show them the lay of the land in the AMS vendor market and kind of show how the different segments bear out and see what some of the newer vendors are and what they're doing, and happy to have that conversation. If you're on the fence and trying to make some decisions, perhaps a conversation would be helpful. Please call.
Yeah, it sounds good. And that's associationsrewired.com.
Thank you. That's the place. Wonderful. Thanks, Chris. I enjoyed this.
Me too. Thank you.
Okay. Bye.